Welcome back to my channel, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I want to get into my thoughts and give you my review for Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the brand new horror movie that just dropped in theaters and on Peacock, and I've got some thoughts here for you. But before I get into it, like always, welcome back to the Haunted Beard. It's all horror and thriller movie content on my channel, so listen, do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard. A troubled security guard begins working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. During his first night on the job, he realizes that the night shift won't be so easy to get through. Pretty soon he will unveil what actually happened at Freddy's. I should probably start off by saying that I have never actually played the Five Nights at Freddy's game that the movie is based on. I have no connection or affection for it, to it whatsoever. So there's probably some things in the movie that are clues or connections or Easter eggs or something like that to the game that I totally missed. So take that into account for my review. So I'll start off by giving what I think is the best aspect of the movie. And for me, it was the relationship between really the two main characters of Mike and what I thought at first was his daughter, but turns out to be his little sister. And that is the character of Abby. I think the film does a pretty good job just with their relationship dynamic. It gets you involved emotionally, at least enough to be able to care about these characters, to root for them. There's this custody battle between Mike and the aunt that takes place, and Mike is trying to prove that he can hold down a solid job, to prove that he is responsible enough to be able to take care and provide for his younger sister. And so they do a pretty good job with their dynamic and just getting you to connect and care and root for these characters. And so I think the film should be commended for that. However, there is not a whole lot else in Five Nights at Freddy's that I really found worthwhile or really thought was all that great. Now, Five Nights at Freddy's is really a gateway entry-level horror movie. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it definitely left quite a bit to be desired in terms of the actual kills and horror displayed on screen. This is a PG-13 horror movie, which nothing really wrong with that. There are plenty of great PG-13 horror movies, but you know that with it being PG-13, they're going to be very limited in terms of what they can show and what kind of kills you're going to get. And that's fine. However, with PG-13, if you can't deliver on the blood, guts, and gore, you've really got to come through and give us something good with the suspense and the atmosphere and the tension and just the overall creepy eeriness factor. But Five Nights at Freddy's just falls short in all of that. This is a movie that I think if you have seen more than 4 or 5 horror movies, there's really not going to be much here, again, in terms of the atmosphere, the suspense, and the tension that is really all that effective, as it's a pretty tame and mild horror movie overall. There's a handful of jump scares that are not really that effective. There's some okay moments of atmosphere. Overall, the film, it looks pretty good. There's some decent production value to it, which it's kind of what you would expect, though, given that this is a theatrical release. There is a pretty decent budget behind it, but I just really found it lacking in the horror, in the scares. It's just really not that scary. And I think they would have been better taking this in one of 2 other possible directions. This is something that I felt is like a borderline PG-rated kids movie. And I think it would have been better to kind of even go that route, a la Haunted Mansion, Goosebumps type thing. That would have suited it a little bit better. Or if they would have went completely the opposite direction and made this just a totally over-the-top R-rated horror movie. But they would have needed to have brought in some kind of silly, corny, humorous elements into it, because this movie is pretty silly and ridiculous, but it takes itself too seriously. And so as it sits, it's just kind of that middle-of-the-road PG-13 where it's a little bit too much to be a kid's movie, but not nearly enough to be this over-the-top, ridiculous, R-rated horror film. And so it's just kind of this middle-of-the-road, sort of safe, easygoing, generic horror movie that, again, I just didn't really find all that effective. And as I just mentioned, this is a silly movie, but it takes itself quite seriously, which really kind of brings me into my next major issue with the movie, and that has to do with the overall story. It starts off intriguing enough, and there's this sort of dream type element here that you get, which is kind of interesting. And there's really two major kind of storylines here. One of them directly involves the character of Mike and his past, and then the other one involves Freddy's and what exactly is going on there. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that eventually they come together, which is to be expected. Only when they finally come together, how these two stories fit together and work together, and when you finally get this big sort of exposition dump scene towards the end of the movie, the explanation for how these two stories fit together is just ridiculous. The fact that it tries to take it very seriously without understanding how absurd it all is, I think it really would have helped to have brought in a humorous, comedic, almost corny, cheesy type element to this to acknowledge, yeah, this is all pretty silly. Also, when you get that exposition scene towards the end, the character who is delivering that, it really had me questioning their actions in terms of why they did certain things and didn't do other things that I was really kind of confused by and didn't really understand. And then it builds up to the whole climactic scene, and the climax, unfortunately, doesn't land. And I'm sure you've experienced horror movies like that where they're counting on you to be invested, it leads you to this big moment, and it just kind of falls flat. Not only does it fall flat, but it kind of just left me shaking my head and rolling my eyes at, again, just the ridiculousness and silliness of it all. There is a reveal that occurs during the climax of the movie that I saw coming from a mile away, and there are elements of this movie that are predictable. I was able to figure out some of it. However, there are other elements that are unpredictable. I feel the reason that they're unpredictable is, again, because this movie is so silly and ridiculous that you would never really think to guess that is how it all comes together. Overall, Five Nights at Freddy's for me is a miss. There's just not really much here that I got out of it, and it's just not scary. For a horror movie, if I was grading this out of 10 on scares, it would be maybe a 2 out of 10. I don't really see the scariness of these big animatronic animal puppets. The way that they use those, it's just not very effective or creepy or scary. So, didn't really work for me. I think overall, I'm going to give Five Nights at Freddy's, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. So, those are my thoughts. Hit me up down below, like always. Let me know what you thought of this movie. I'd definitely be curious, though, for people who have played the game and are big fans of it and are familiar with the story and the lore. What did you think of this movie? Would be really interested in hearing your perspective and your take on it. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll let you know real quick. Up next, I'm planning on watching, finally, When Evil Lurks. It just dropped on Shudder today. I can't wait to watch it. I'm going to be having my review out for that very soon, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So that's all I have. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.